All right, so get this. We're diving into some seriously juicy stuff today. We got our hands on some recently declassified UK files, and let me tell you, this is the real deal, the intel leading up to the 2003 Iraq War.
Yeah, this is the stuff history is made of. We're
Uh,
talking top secret assessments, behind closed door debates, the whole 9 yards.
It's like getting a backstage pass to one of the most consequential periods in recent history. You ever wonder what was going through their heads?
It's fascinating, really. These documents give us a look into the UK's decision-making process during a time of, well, immense global tension. Remember, this is post 9/11, the world's on edge, and the thought of Saddam Hussein with WMDs.
Yeah, not a good combination.
Not at all. So picture this. It's late 2002, and the UK is looking at Saddam, and their intel is painting a picture of a man playing a dangerous game. They called it relative compliance.
Relative compliance. It sounds so innocent, doesn't it?
Right, but it was anything but. He seemed to be towing the line just enough to avoid giving them a clear reason to invade.
Like he was trying to stay one step ahead?
Exactly. It was a high-stakes gamble for sure. Saddam seemed to believe, at least according to some of this intel, that he could actually avoid a war altogether. So he's making just enough concessions to keep the US and UK guessing, but not enough to appear weak.
Because image was everything for a guy like Saddam.
Absolutely. He needed to maintain his image both for his people and to, avoid emboldening any rivals in the region. You can't show weakness if you're Saddam Hussein.
Okay, so we've got Saddam playing his hand. But what about the UK? Were they buying this Relative Compliance Act, or were they starting to smell a rat?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the truth is there was a real split within the UK government. You had some officials who thought, hey, maybe Saddam really is trying to disarm, even if it's at the 11th hour.
Better late than never.
Right. But then you had others who saw this whole relative compliance thing as a calculated ploy. They thought he was just buying time, maybe even trying to drive a wedge between the US and its allies.
And ultimately hold on to power.
Exactly. They were trying to figure out if he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, basically.
Talk about pressure. I mean, trying to read the mind of someone like Saddam Hussein, especially with the weight of the post 9/11 world on their shoulders.
Can't imagine they were sleeping much.
I know, right? You can't help but wonder if they ever look back and think, man, we were naive.
Well, whether they were naive or not, one thing's for sure, they knew the stakes were incredibly high.
Absolutely.
The UK was very aware of the message it would send if they appeared weak or indecisive. Remember, this was also about setting a precedent. They were worried that if Saddam could defy the international community on WMDs and get away with it, well, it could embolden other dictators and terrorist groups.
So this is about a lot more than just Iraq.
A lot more. They were thinking about the domino effect. If they didn't take a hard line here, what kind of message would that send to other bad actors?
Okay, so it's a long-term global security anxieties, not just the immediate crisis.
Exactly. The UK was walking a tightrope, you see. Their own national security, pressure from the US, and then there's the need to maintain that united international front. It's like a textbook case of how messy things get in the real world, with all these different factors all coming into play.
It's mind-boggling when you really think about it. So they've got this intel. They're debating Saddam's true intentions. What happens next? Don't tell me. It's time for the UN inspectors to make a comeback.
You guessed it. The UN inspectors return to Iraq, and the whole world is holding its breath.
Will they find the WMDs? The smoking gun?
That's the big question.
Everyone's waiting with bated breath. Do they find anything?
Well, it's not exactly a Hollywood ending. No massive stockpiles of chemical weapons, no signs of an active nuclear program, at least not right away.
So no smoking gun.
No smoking gun. But, and this is a big but, that doesn't mean the UK is convinced. Because they've got all this other intel that just doesn't add up with what Iraq's been telling them. It's like they're looking at two completely different pictures, and they can't figure out which one is real.
Classic intelligence dilemma. So what tips the scales? What makes them think Saddam's hiding something?
It's actually a seemingly small detail that ends up blowing things wide open. The Air Force document, they called it.
The Air Force document. Sounds ominous.
Well, it was discovered back in 1998, just a document tucked away in an Iraqi Air Force safe. Sounds harmless, right?
Yeah, like something you'd find in a filing cabinet.
Exactly. But here's the thing. It detailed the bombs used by Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, chemical weapons included.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
And the details in this document, they directly contradicted everything Iraq had previously claimed about their chemical weapons use. Basically, they got caught in a lie.
And that casts a shadow on everything else they're saying.
Exactly. It's like if they lied about this, what else are they lying about? It played right into the hands of those who already believed Saddam was just playing for time.
And remember that whole push for a second resolution from the UN Security Council.
The one authorizing military action.
That one. This document just throws fuel on the fire.
Big time.
Yeah.
But it's not like the rest of the world is just going to roll over. You had some major players who were pushing back hard against the idea of rushing into war.
Yeah, this wasn't exactly a united front, was it? Weren't France and Russia pretty vocal about their opposition?
Oh, absolutely. They were deeply skeptical, to say the least. They believed in continued diplomacy, giving the inspectors more time. They just weren't convinced that a case for war had been made.
So you've got the US and UK on one side, France and Russia on the other, and the UN inspectors stuck in the middle, just trying to do their jobs with the weight of the world on their shoulders.
And the clock is ticking away. The pressure is mounting. The UK knows they need that second resolution if they want international support for military action.
But getting everyone on board, especially with France and Russia digging in their heels, it's not looking good. So what's their next move? What's their game plan?
Well, they know they can't afford to alienate potential allies, so it's all about diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy.
Backroom deals, late-night phone calls, the whole shebang.
You bet. They're working the phones, they're holding meetings, they're pulling out all the stops to try and get those undecided Security Council members on board.
I bet those were some intense conversations.
Yeah.
This isn't just some abstract policy debate, right? These are decisions with potentially massive global consequences.
Absolutely. And those consequences were front and center in a lot of these discussions.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, take Chile and Mexico, for instance.
Yeah.
They were key swing votes on the Security Council, and the UK knew it. So they really brought out the big guns, arguing that a strong, unified message from the UN was absolutely crucial to deter Saddam and maintain global security. A fractured front, they argued, would only embolden him.
Strength in numbers. Makes sense. But it can't just be about talking tough, can it? They needed something concrete to back up their claims about Saddam.
Exactly. And they had just the thing. Remember that 167-page report compiled by UNMOVIC, the clusters document?
Oh yeah, that thing was massive. A deep dive into Iraq's history of, shall we say, not playing by the rules.
That's the one. And when I say history, I mean it. This report went way back, laying out in excruciating detail years of broken promises, unanswered questions, and blatant attempts to obstruct the weapons inspectors.
167 pages of that. Talk about an indictment.
It was basically the UK's way of saying, see, this isn't just a one-time thing. This is a pattern of behavior.
They were trying to prove that Saddam couldn't be trusted.
Exactly. They wanted to show the world, and especially those skeptical Security Council members, that this wasn't just about the here and now. This was about years of deception.
Okay, so we've got the diplomatic pressure cooker, we've got this damning report, but the clock's still ticking, isn't it? What happens when diplomacy stalls and time starts running out?
Well, that's when things get really interesting. The UK had one last card to play, one final attempt to avert war. They called it a final warning to Saddam.
A final warning. Okay, now you got my attention. What does that even look like?
It wasn't just a strongly worded letter, if that's what you're thinking. The UK laid out a series of very specific tests, concrete actions that Saddam had to take to prove he was serious about disarming.
No more games, right?
No more games. They wanted clear, verifiable proof of cooperation.
So what were these tests? What did they want Saddam to actually do?
Well, one of the key demands was allowing UN inspectors to interview Iraqi scientists. But here's the catch, they had to be interviewed outside of the country.
Smart. Get them away from any potential pressure from Saddam's regime.
Exactly. The UK believed that getting these scientists face-to-face in a safe and neutral environment was the only way to get an honest assessment of Iraq's capabilities.
Remove that element of fear, that sense that Big Brother's always watching.
Exactly. But that wasn't all. They also wanted Iraq to come clean about some suspicious items the inspectors had uncovered.
Suspicious items? Like what?
We're talking things like remote-controlled drones, spray tanks, that sort of thing, items that could potentially be used to disperse chemical or biological agents.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty suspicious.
Right, so they basically told Saddam, you need to provide documentation, explanations, the whole backstory on these items. Transparency was key.
So, come clean about the past and prove you're willing to cooperate in the present. 2 birds, 1 stone. Did it work?
Well, it seemed like a solid strategy, at least on paper. The problem was the international community was still deeply divided, and trust, especially between certain key players, was in short supply.
Uh-oh. This doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. France, which had been getting more and more vocal in its opposition, finally made it crystal clear they were prepared to veto any resolution authorizing the use of force, no matter what.
So that's it, game over.
Pretty much. And meanwhile, the U.S. is watching all of this unfold, and they are not happy.
They're running out of patience.
Big time. They're convinced Saddam's just stalling, and they're done playing games.
So here we are. Diplomatic efforts have stalled. The U.S. is ready to throw down, and the U.K. is caught in the middle.
Talk about a rock and a hard place.
It's March 2003. What happens next?
Well, on March 17th and 18th, with that second UN resolution officially dead in the water, the UK, despite all the internal debate, all the diplomatic wrangling,
They made their decision.
they joined the US-led invasion of Iraq.
So that's it then. The die is cast. After all the intelligence, all the diplomacy, all the back and forth, the UK throws in its lot with the U.S., and we're on the road to war.
And what a road it turned out to be. The invasion itself was just the beginning, the first chapter in a very long, very complicated story.
And let's not forget, even after all that, after the invasion, after no WMDs were ever found, the debate about whether it was the right call, well, that's a debate that's still going strong today.
It's a question that continues to haunt us, doesn't it? And these documents, they don't make things any easier. They offer a glimpse into those crucial moments, but there's no easy answer.
It really makes you think, what would I have done? If I was sitting there back in '03 with all that pressure, all that uncertainty, would I have made the same call?
It's a question worth asking yourself,
Uh-huh.
but it wasn't just an external pressure cooker, was it? I mean, remember, back in the UK, there was a lot of internal debate about the war. Not everyone was on board with the decision to invade.
Right, like a lot of these things, it wasn't black and white, was it? There were people who genuinely believed military action was necessary, and then there were those who thought it was a terrible mistake.
Exactly. And these documents really highlight that division. You had people like Jack Straw, the foreign secretary at the time, arguing that this was about enforcing the UN's authority. That if they let Saddam get away with this, it would set a dangerous precedent.
But then you had people like Robin Cook, who resigned from the cabinet in protest. He basically said, I'm out. I can't support this.
A powerful statement. He just didn't buy it. He thought the evidence for war was weak and worried about the consequences of invasion. And looking back, it's hard not to see where he was coming from.
It's easy to judge in hindsight, but in the moment, with the information they had, it must have been an incredibly difficult decision. It really shows you the weight of these intelligence assessments, the impact they can have on the world stage.
Absolutely. And not just intelligence assessments, but the way they're interpreted, the way they're used to justify political decisions.
And how those decisions, for better or for worse, have consequences that ripple through history. It's like we've uncovered this one piece of the puzzle, this one moment in time, but it speaks to so much more.
It really does. And, you know, in a way, these events from 2003, they're still relevant today. Think about the challenges we face now. International relations, the spread of misinformation, the threat of terrorism. These are all things that were at play back then, too.
So it's not just about understanding the past. It's about using that understanding to navigate the present, maybe even create a better future.
Exactly. By digging into these complex issues, by engaging with different perspectives, we're better equipped to be informed citizens to make sense of the world around us.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just dates and names in a textbook. It's about real people, real decisions, and the very real consequences of those decisions.
Consequences that we're still grappling with today. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you're faced with a complex issue, a decision with no easy answers, remember the lessons of 2003. Think critically, challenge assumptions, and never underestimate the power of your own voice.